Goblin launch detected.
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back to the last bonus game of 2023. To celebrate another great year in passing, Cool Stuff and I have teamed up to give away 4 $50 gift cards. I'm going to provide a link down below as to how you can enter, but thanks again for watching, and please be sure to use the promo code MTGMudsta with Cool Stuff Inc. whenever you place an order. Getting to the game itself, in today's game, Matt, John, and Arja have joined me, and Matt is playing his Nalia Party Time deck, keeping Command Tower, Swamp, Plains, Giver of Ruins, Soul Ring, Land Tax, and Voldaren Bloodcaster. John is playing the Blind Seer, keeping Isochron Scepter, 2 Islands, War Room, Arcane Lighthouse, and Halimar Depths. I am playing Ramos, keeping Temple Garden, Overgrown Tomb, Drowned Catacomb, Lord Drakis, Swamp, Growth Spiral, and Force of Negation. Last but not least is Arja playing his Hapatra deck, and he keeps Forest, Swamp, High Market, Grim Backwoods, Tribute to the World Tree, Zulaport Cutthroat, and Village Rites. I win the die roll and start us off. I play a tapped Overgrown Tomb. Arja plays a Forest. John plays a tapped Halimar Depths and rearranges his top 3. Matt has a Plains for turn and taps it to cast Soul Ring. He then taps the Soul Ring for an Arcane Signet, and then taps the Arcane Signet for a Land Tax. In a pale comparison, I just draw and play a Drowned Catacombs untapped and pass. Arja has a Swamp for turn and pays a green and a black for Hapatra. John plays an Island and pays 0 for a Mana Crypt. He then taps out, casting the Blind Seer, and passes. During his end step, I cast Growth Spiral, drawing a card and putting out a Temple Garden tapped. Matt goes to find some basics from his Land Tax trigger on his upkeep, putting 3 of them to hand. He then draws for turn and plays a Swamp in his main phase. He then pays 1 white for a Giver of Ruins, and then taps 3 for a Dream Stealer and passes to me. I draw and play a Swamp for turn, and just pass after that. Arja has a Swamp, and hits me with Hapatra. I take 2 commander damage, and he uses her on damage ability to put a -1/-1 counter onto the Dream Stealer, and he gets to make a Snake token as well. Arja then plays out a Zulaport Cutthroat, and passes to John. John passes his Crypt Flip, and draws for turn and plays an Island. He then casts Commander's Plate, and gears up the Blind Seer with it. Moving to combat, he hits Arja for 6, and passes after that. Matt's upkeep has him going to find more basics from his Land Tax trigger, and he then draws for turn. He plays a Plains, and then brings out Nalia, but still has a colorless floating. He uses that to help cast Invasion of Gobakan, and he targets Arja with it. This lets him look at his hand, and he exiles Arja's Tribute of the World Tree, and then has John defend the battle. With nothing else, he passes. I draw, play an Island, and then cast an Insatiable Hemophage. With nothing else, I pass to Arja. During my end step though, Arja casts a Village Rites, sacrificing the Snake token. This has the Zulaport Cutthroat draining his opponents for 1, and he draws 2 cards, and then moves to his turn. Arja draws and plays a Swamp. He then pays 3 for an Obelisk Spider, and goes to combat. He hits John with Hapatra, and has her -1/-1 counter go into the Giver of Ruins. This makes him another Snake token, and also has the Spider draining his opponents for 1. Arja then casts a Fume Spitter in his second main phase, and passes to John. John correctly calls his Crypt Flip, and then plays an Island after drawing. He casts an Isochron Scepter, which as it comes in, imprints Hydroblast to it. He then swings at Arja again, dealing another 6 commander damage with the blind Seer, and then passes turn. Matt once more gets his land tax trigger, going to find 3 basics, and then shuffles and draws for turn. He plays a command tower, and then casts a Harbor Recruiter. He then casts a squad commander from the top of his library, and as it comes in, makes 4 warrior tokens. Matt then says he'll move to combat, but before leaving the main phase, Arja sacrifices a Fume Spitter to give the Giver of Ruins another -1/-1 counter. This has the Zulaport Cutthroat draining us for 1, and with the ability for the -1/-1 counter on the stack, Matt then activates the Giver to give Nalia protection from black, and the -1/-1 counter is then applied, and the Giver of Ruins dies. This then has Arja making a Snake token and draining his opponents again from the Obelisk Spider, and Matt then finally moves to combat. He swings the Dreamstealer and Nalia at the battle, taking it out, which he then exiles. This lets him cast a Light Shield Array, and Matt then passes, and puts a +1/+1 counter onto the creatures that attack this turn because of the Array's end of turn trigger. I draw and chalk in a Breeding Pool, which then allows me to mutate a Lord Dracus onto my Hemophage. This has my opponents getting drained for 1, and I return to hand a Growth Spiral. I then pass to Arja after that. Arja has a Swamp for turn, and casts Sir Conrad the Grim, which, once I gain priority, has me casting Growth Spiral. John decides to respond to this, but doesn't care about my Growth Spiral, and instead makes Sir Conrad a red spell. He then activates the Isochron Scepter, casting Hydroblast to counter it. The Growth Spiral then resolves with me drawing a card. Going to combat, Arja then hits John with Hapatra, and gives a -1/-1 counter to the Harper Recruiter. This kills the Harper, and Arja then makes a Snake token, and gets to drain us for 1 because of the Spider trigger. With nothing else, he passes. John loses his Crypt Flip, taking 3, and draws for turn. He then plays a War Room, and moving to combat, continues to hit Arja with the Blind Seer. He passes once he connects. Matt chooses not to use his land tax trigger after looking at his top card, and instead just draws. He then casts Lazella off the top, and then a Maskwood Nexus. We then go to combat, and Nalia, seeing that he has a full party, adds a +1/+1 counter to everything, which, because he has Lazelle out, is actually 2 +1/+1 counters instead. His team also gets +1/+0 and indestructible because of the squad commander. He then swings the warrior tokens at Arja, the squad commander at me, and the Dreamstealer at John. Before damage is dealt, John casts a Mystical Tutor to go and find a spell, since he'll end up discarding his hand, and we all then take our hits. Matt then moves to his end step, adding a +1/+1 counter because of the Light Shield Array, which is actually 2 because of Lazelle, and before moving to my turn, John reveals that he finds Cyclonic Rift and puts it on top. I draw and play Vizier of the Menagerie, really hoping to find a red source for the cards that I have in hand. I don't, and just pass after that. Arja has a High Market for turn, and casts Crab the Unredeemed, and then goes to combat. He swings Hapatra at John, who connects, and Arja has the -1/-1 counter going onto my Vizier. This drains Arja's opponents for 1 because of the Obelisk Spider, and makes him a Snake token. He then passes, and during his end step, John activates War Room, losing 1 life and drawing a card. John takes another 3 from a failed Crypt Flip and goes to combat. He swings the Blind Seer at Arja to try and take him out, and before damage, Arja activates Krav. He sacrifices 8 creatures, which has his opponents getting drained for 8, and he gains 8 life, but sadly still dies to taking 21 points of commander damage. With nothing else, John passes. On Matt's upkeep, he uses the land tax trigger and goes to find some basics, but can only find 1 plains as he's now out of basics completely. He then draws for turn and goes to combat. Responding to the Nalia trigger, John overloads a Cyclonic Rift. Matt then passes through combat, and in his second main phase, replays Soul Ring, the Signet, Dreamstealer, and then Nalia. He then passes, discarding down to 7. I draw a land, which is a plains, and I play it. I then cast Vizier of the Menagerie, and then Swiftfoot Boots. I then pay the 1 to gear them up onto the Vizier, and pass to John. John fails his flip again, taking 3 from the Mana Crypt. He then draws for turn, and casts Master of Waves, making 3 Elemental Horse tokens. He then goes to combat, hitting Matt for 6 with the Blind Seer, and passing turn. Matt plays a Plains for turn, and asks for cards in hand. He then plays Voice of the Blessed, and then recasts Lizelle. Moving to combat, he adds 2+1/+1 counters to his full party, with Nalia and Lizelle working in tandem. He then swings Nalia at John, and the Dreamstealer at me. Before moving to blocks though, he casts Akroma's Will, but I'm quick to put a stop to it by countering it with a Force of Negation, exiling Flame of Anor from hand. John decides to also use Whim of Volrath to change the Master of Waves protection from red to black, and he blocks Nalia. I then take the hit from the Dreamstealer and have to discard a bunch of cards from hand. With nothing else, Matt passes. I draw and mutate Lord Drakis onto my Vizier, returning to hand the Growth Spiral. I then recast it, drawing a card, and finding a Blood Crypt which I play tapped. I then pass after that. John correctly calls his Mana Crypt flip, and then decides to go to combat, swinging the Blind Seer at Matt, and deals 6. With nothing else, he passes. Matt draws, and in his main phase, casts Toxic Deluge, paying 1 life into it. I pass priority, but John decides to make it red with the Blind Seer, and then activates the Scepter, casting Hydroblast to counter it. Matt then casts a Mastwood Nexus, and he goes to combat. He adds 2+1/+1 counters to his team, and he swings the Voice of Blessing, the Dreamstealer, and Nalia at John. John blocks what he can, and he takes out the Dreamstealer, but sadly still dies to an unblocked flying Voice of Blessing. With nothing else, Matt passes. I untap and draw. I mutate a Glowstone Recluse onto my stack in my main phase, adding 2+1/+1 counters to the Vizier, and return to hand a Growth Spiral. I cast it for a 4th time this game, trying to find a board wipe, but sadly find a Forest instead, which I play. I know I'm pretty much dead to Matt at this point, and scoop it up. Game review time. This game was 41 minutes, and it kinda shows, as we all got beaten down pretty handily by that Nalia deck. Matt was really aggressive from pretty much as soon as he was able to start attacking, and that Dreamstealer was actually really brutal. It got big enough that it was almost taking out everyone's hand when it connected, plus the Menace made it really difficult to connect with. That, combined with Nalia and Lizelle giving 2+1/+1 counters, meant that Matt's creatures were getting enormous during each of his combat steps. On the flip side, when his deck goes really wide, I struggle since Ramos tends to be basically about 1 creature and 1 creature only. I go really hard on that mutate stack, and as you saw, missing red really put me behind. This was the last game I played with Ramos, and I'm taking it apart to free up some of the cards for other decks. Arja's Hapatra deck had actually won the game before, pretty handily with a combo, which is probably why I think everyone is a bit afraid of him. With that in mind, John attacking him with the Blind Seer over and over again until he was taken out kind of makes sense, although there probably should have been a little bit more threat assessment as the game went on. I think had he changed his focus onto Matt earlier on, things would have probably been a little bit better. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.